Okay. Dear Hellenic Aviation Society members, dear friends, dear colleagues, it is with a great pleasure that I welcome you to the 2021 Hellenic Aviation Society Annual General Meeting and Conference. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic and the required health restriction, this year's event will take virtually. However, I am pleased that such distinguished leaders of the aviation sector honor our meeting with their virtual presence tonight. Today's event is under the auspices of Hermes Air Transport Organization, and ATN is the media partner. I am pleased that all speakers today are members of Hermes. The event is recorded and will be available in Hellenic Aviation Society website, as long also with Hermes Air Transport Organization website. When I founded with my colleagues the society back in 2004, I could not imagine that the Hellenic Aviation Society will host today one of the first major events for 2021, gathering such a great number of stakeholders. Since 2017, the Society, at its annual general meeting and conference, has been inviting a prominent figure of the air transport sector to deliver the keynote address. Leaders such as Henrik, Hololei, and Jeff Poole have accepted our invitation in the past. Today, we have the pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Salvatore Sciacchitano, a good friend, personal friend, president of the ICAO Council, and an old friend of the Society, as he was the one to deliver the 2018 keynote address. Salvatore, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kostas. Thank you very much, Andreas, for inviting me. Yes, I was in Athens 3 years ago, and it's so sad that I come back virtually, but it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be again with you. I want to welcome and to greet all the participants. In particular, I've seen the governor of the Civil Aviation Authority of Greece, George Zitsakos, and I wanted to thank him again for the welcome he gave me last summer. That was my unique single mission since I was appointed the president of the Council of ICAO in this during this year of pandemic. So it's my honor to be here in the stage of the Hellenic Aviation Society Assembly. And I would like to express a real gratitude to the president, Papatheodorou, and the Hellenic Aviation Society for having invited me again in this important event. I wish also to thank, as I mentioned before, Kostas Iatrou is a friend, he's also an important key player in Greece in aviation. And there's a pleasure again to see him remotely, because again, as I said before, we cannot meet personally because the aviation skies have never been as dark as we have seen in the past year. Last ICAO economic impact analysis of COVID-19 on civil aviation reveals that for the year 2020, the global passenger traffic has fallen by 60%, or by 2.7 million passengers compared to 2019. The precipitous decline has created severe liquidity strains on the industry, risking its financial viability and threatening millions of jobs across the entire world air transport value chain. Facing this unprecedented situation, ICAO's primary objective has been to react and keep aviation on the path of restart and recovery. Just a few weeks after the appearance of COVID-19, the Council of ICAO established a Council Aviation Recovery Task Force, commonly known as CART, composed by council members, representatives of industry, international organizations, that elaborate a set of principles and recommendations to bring as much international alignment as possible to ongoing national air transport response and the recovery efforts. And I wanted to underline one point on this. This was the first time since many, many years, I assume, that the Council established a task force composed by council representatives, industry representatives, and international organizations, giving a clear sign that the effort had to be common, synergies had to be established in order to address the dramatic situation. Let's remind that in April, we had the drop of the traffic by 98% in some regions. So this was provided, the task force provided the guidance on testing and the cross-border risk mitigation measures. And during the current third phase, we'll be seeking a latest expert advice on the issue of test result validation and vaccine certification. On 12 March, the Council will meet and will consider the proposals, the last proposals. As I said before, these are the last proposals that we need. The task force has developed recommendations, has developed guidelines for the restart. Actually, a restart was successful, but the recovery is still far. There is far because there is, of course, the pandemic, but we now have some instruments. And the instruments are the standardization of medical testing and are the use of vaccine. I will not spoil anything saying that we are discussing with WHO in order to have a recognized vaccination under the auspices of WHO with a certificate. This would allow passengers to travel more easily. For the time being, we understand that the concerns of WHO that is not demonstrated from the technical point of view with the data that vaccination can prevent the infection, can protect, but is not demonstrated that it can prevent the infection. So our objective is to see if it's possible to get a global certificate of vaccination that will be recognized globally. In the meanwhile, we appreciate very much some bilateral initiatives, and Greece has been one of the most active states promoting bilateral agreements for mutual recognition of a certification, of a vaccine certification, of vaccination certification. That's a good step forward. So I was saying that on 12 March, we will have the council meeting considering the proposals of the CART task force. We'll see if there is a need to have other meetings, hopefully no. But we hope that with this decision, we can support the recovery during the spring and the summer season. I was referring that CART task force is issuing recommendations in order to establish air connectivity for a safe, secure, and sustainable in a sustainable manner. This is an important consideration for governments at every level in this most challenging economic environment. And states and industry must therefore continuously strive to improve their coordination on public health corridors that have been promoted by ICAO, international recognized testing and vaccination certification, as I said before, and also ongoing vaccine distribution of air cargo worldwide. At the same time, monitoring the implementation of these measures has been organized by ICAO based on global and regional roadmaps and through its COVID-19 monitoring platforms. Over 95% of ICAO member states are providing us with real-time traffic and the public health data through these platforms, greatly assisted our pandemic monitoring analysis and forecasting efforts. Where reestablishing the sustainability is concerned, this must be inclusive of improving air transport resilience for future pandemic events. This is something that we have to consider. Once that COVID-19 will be over, we must be prepared to address a new pandemic that could happen in a different way. Second, strengthening its economic viability in the face of the new normality. And third, ensuring a future air service are better aligned with the climate priorities of the 21st century. How we achieve these objectives is the key question we face today as a global aviation community. And the innovation will be critical to every strategic target and the priority we establish together. In this regard, ICAO was prescient in focusing on innovation theme for international aviation for the 2020-24 period. Innovation is advancing rapidly in all domains: safety, air navigation, security, and environment. ICAO must keep pace and is consequently taking steps to reevaluate the rulemaking process and to establish a special and new partnership designated to accelerate its capacity to assess and enable new technologies and procedures. One of these steps is the establishment of a high-level consultative forum with the industry on innovation. This will allow the Council of ICAO not only to keep pace with innovation, but to anticipate initiatives in support of innovation implementation. One of the sectors where innovation will play a fundamental role in the short and medium term is CO2 emission reduction, as we perfectly know. New propulsion fuels and new engines can play a pivotal role in reducing CO2 emissions. Electric engines are already a reality and can become widely used in the next 10 to 15 years. Similarly, hydrogen engines can introduce a revolutionary innovation on an aircraft propulsion. Of course, ICAO is not looking solely at innovation for CO2 emission reduction. I wish to recall that ICAO, as well as the International Maritime Organization, IMO, has been tasked with addressing aviation's impact on climate change at a global level. And from the basket of measures, the most known is the basket measure called Corsia Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. Its objective is to be the single worldwide market-based measure mechanism in order to avoid the patchwork of initiatives. The pilot phase of Corsia has started its implementation on 1st January 2021, just a little bit more than 1 month ago, and will last until the 31st December 2023, during which time 88 ICAO member states are implementing these measures on a voluntary basis. In 2026, Corsia will be implemented by all ICAO states. States have also asked ICAO to undertake a feasibility study aiming at identifying a long-term emission goal for international civil aviation. This work has now begun in earnest. The Council of ICAO will submit a proposal in this regard to next assembly in 2022. And I'm confident that decisions taken by the Assembly will assure the continued sustainable development of international transport. At the same time, I'm very pleased to learn that several states, as well as several airlines, are working in order to reach the zero carbon emission goal by 2050. Now, concluding, let me recall that as we continue to work to align the global aviation pandemic response, we must not forget that air transport has consistently defied recessionary cycles, precisely because air connectivity served as one of the most effective means of generating a return to growth and prosperity. In this regard, I want to reiterate that our world still remains connected by aviation, and it will continue to be long after the pandemic is behind us. Our sector, despite confronting the most serious and disrupting global public health event in several generations, still moved in 2020 1.8 billion people last year, while ensuring the essential foods, medicines, and other urgent supplies and personnel were transported quickly and reliably to where the world needed them most. And ICAO has been proud to fulfill its important multilateral role during this challenging time And we will continue our efforts to ensure a safe and harmonized COVID-19 recovery for global air transport. With this, I conclude my short remarks, thanking you again for inviting me, and with the hope is that we can meet again in person, so that we can add value to these events that are important because they contribute to share information, to promote initiatives, to support initiatives. But it's important that the personal relationship, is important that the networking, is important the understanding of the reciprocal views, sometimes in different domains, sometimes confrontational views, but is relevant. So my hope is that with the efforts of everybody, with ICAO in the first row in this stage, we will be able to come back to meet in person and to continue our traditional events and meetings as done in the past. At the same time, we must admit that we have learned a different way of communication. These mechanisms were already existing, but we have been obliged to use. Sometimes will be helpful in order to continue this kind of connections even without the personal contact. But this will be a complementary way to continue our way to support the development of international transport. In this regard, I wish to thank again you all for inviting me. I have not mentioned several of the participants in the efforts of ICAO that are also participating today in this event, but I don't want to nominate anyone because I will forget somebody else. So thank you very much again for inviting me, and thank you very much for giving the opportunity to participate in this event.
Thank you, Salvatore. Thank you for giving a global perspective on where we're heading. We have to be optimists. I fully agree with you that internet cannot replace the personal touch, the personal contact, the physical contact. We were thrilled and honored to have you last August here in Athens. Hopefully to see you again in Hermes AGM next summer. Yes, cross finger, or the Arab saying, inshallah, as we have also Abdul Wahab, then hopefully we'll be able to meet physically, because don't forget, we have to be the promoters of our industry. Then we travel. Without traveling, there is no aviation. Then we have to be the leaders to move around and move forward. And of course, as representing Hermes, on behalf also of the board, that many of the board members are participating today also in the panel, we look forward to work with ICAO closely, also in this innovation initiative that we had also the pleasure to participate last September. Now I would like to invite Professor Andreas Papatheodorou to present the 2021 Keramyanakis Award. For those that you don't know, Keramyanakis was the first president of Hellenic Aviation Society and the first honorary member. But Andreas will give you more information about Manuel Keramyanakis and who is the recipient of this year's award. Andrea, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kostas. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. As Kostas said, the Keramyanakis Award honors the memory of the first president and honorary member of the Hellenic Aviation Society, and the award is given to people that have contributed to the evolution of air transport around the globe. Emmanuel Keramyanakis was an eminent figure in the Greek civil aviation sector. He headed the Greek delegation in over 70 rounds of air service navigations and negotiations, including those related to the bilateral air service agreements with the United States in 1984, 85, and 1990, 1991. Keramyanakis was a member for 15 years of the European Commission Aviation Group, which elaborated the first, second, and third aviation legislation packages in the European Union. He successfully represented Greece in meetings and conferences organized by the European Civil Aviation Conference and by the International Civil Aviation Organization. In 1999, he was appointed as an expert for mediation on dispute resolution by ICAO. He studied political sciences and law at Athens and Aristotle University of Athens, and he had acted as a speaker in several fora around the world. He had published extensively several papers and articles on transport issues, and very significant as well, he served as the first president of the Hellenic Aviation Society between 2004 and 2012, when he was elected as the first honorary member. And Aviation News honored him with the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012. So as I said before, the award is given to people that have really contributed and excelled in the context of aviation, to very distinguished people around the world. And this year, it's a great honor and pleasure for the Hellenic Aviation Society to present this award to the president of the ICAO Council, Mr. Salvatore Sciacchitano. And Mr. President, I would like to warmly thank you on behalf of the board and the entire society for accepting this award. A few things about the president. He graduated in telecommunications engineering from the University of Catania. He then joined the Italian Airworthiness Authority, where he held various positions of increasing responsibility. He became regulation director in 1992, and then technical director, and then in 1996, the director general. With the merger of the aviation branch of the Ministry of Transport and RAI, which, as we said before, is the Italian Airworthiness Authority, the subsequent establishment of ENAC, Mr. Sciacchitano assumed the position of Deputy Director General, and in this context, he coordinated various business divisions, and he was also entrusted with multiple responsibilities, such as the Permanent Commission of EUROCONTROL, representing Italy in the management board of the European Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, holding the vice presidency of the EUROCONTROL Provisional Council, and coordinating various AACO assemblies. And as a result of his extensive experience, he was then appointed as the executive of European Civil Aviation Conference in 2010. And in February 2019, he joined the Italian delegation on ICAO, and he served there until he became the president of the council in 2020. So, Ms. Salvatore Sciacchitano, once again, thank you so much for accepting this award. Unfortunately, and due to the logistics crisis that we currently face in aviation, I need to admit that we sent a very, very nice award in plexiglass to the president back in mid-January by courier, but unfortunately it hasn't reached him yet. So as this event is virtual, again, what I'm going to do is to show you a graphical representation of the award. So let me just share the screen so that I can show you all what the award looks like. So as you can see, this is the head of late Emmanuel Keramianakis. And as we said, the award for this year goes to Salvatore Sciacchitano, President of ICAO Council. Mr. President, thank you so much once again for accepting this award. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Let me say just a few words. It's a real honor for me to be nominated for the Keramianakis Award. Particularly as it commemorates my highly estimated and distinguished aviation colleague Emanuele Keramianakis, who was and will always be an outstanding figure of Greece, Europe, and the international skies, I would say. I'm delighted to accept this award, recognize the work towards the development of air transport at a global level. And I would like to emphasize that any advancement in aviation relies heavily on a spirit and determination for partnership and collaboration, which have always been and so well embodied in Emanuele. You mentioned my boring CV, Andreas. It recalled me in a certain way something very positive. How many people I have met, how many people I have known in this long career. And this long CV has highlighted, I must admit, that is my fault because I never met Emanuele Keramenakis. This is something that I must admit, and in this sense is a real pleasure to accept this award for the relevance of this person. That I wish to acknowledge once more, now that I'm a president of the Council of ICAO, because I have seen from the CV that he was appointed as a facilitator in one of the disputes of ICAO. And to be nominated by the Council of ICAO as a facilitator of one of the disputes before the Council is a real great acknowledgement of the role and the authority of the person. This has been striking me, and I wanted to underline. So thank you. For the time being, I accept the virtual copy, and I hope that the COVID-19 will allow me to receive the hard copy. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Salvatore. And before we proceed to the executive webinar that we have arranged for today with very distinguished speakers, I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Dritrakos, who is the governor of the Hellenic Civil Aviation Authority, for a welcome note. Mr. Dritrakos, please.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody, and good morning to President of ICAO, Salvatore Sciacchitano, which I had the honor to meet him last August in Athens. Of course, and hello to my friend Juan Carlos Salazar. It is my pleasure to participate in this special event that I'm sure that it will offer great services to the aviation sector in these difficult times. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Dritrakos. And so congratulations, Salvatore. You really deserve this award. And just to add, for me, Emanuele Keramenakis was a mentor. He learned me about ICAO more and helped me also to conduct my PhD. Then honor his memory. It's very important, and to remember people that help to move the aviation forward. And now we move to the executive panel, and I'm really pleased to welcome Jeff Poole, who is a very good friend of mine. He's the president of Hermes Air Transfer Organization and senior vice president of WTTC. The theme of the virtual conference is taking off again, the air transfer sector in the post-COVID-19 era. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kostas. Good evening, everybody. It's a great personal pleasure for me to be back with friends in the Hellenic Aviation Society and with friends and colleagues from across the air transport sector generally. And thank you to all of you who have helped to organize this webinar. The topic today of the air transport sector in the post-COVID-19 era is probably quite a predictable one. And I would think that this is not the first webinar with that theme in mind, and it certainly won't be the last. But that said, I think we are in a really exciting and challenging situation at the moment. So I'm really hopeful that my friends and colleagues on the panel today will be able to give us some really unique perspectives. I'm not expecting answers to the present challenges, but interesting perspectives. And I suspect that one thing that the last year has told us is that if we thought we had an answer today, it wouldn't be the relevant answer for tomorrow anyway. And one of the things that this industry has to do is to remain extremely agile and robust, as Salvatore was indicating earlier. Now, we know that the air transport sector, the broader travel and tourism sector, national and global economies have been completely devastated by the impact of COVID-19. And early on in this crisis, in my work in the World Travel and Tourism Council, we identified that there were two key factors that we needed to develop to get into a recovery scene. And that was really to remove the barriers to travel And by that we mean we have to be able to reopen borders in a safe way with appropriate protocols in place, etc., but also remove very real barriers to travel, such as quarantines. The second element was to rebuild traveller confidence. We would need to be able to convince people that they not only did they want to travel, but they would be able to travel safely. And all the signs on that are, from our sentiment surveys, are that that willingness and wish to travel is in fact probably built up into a frustration now, and that many people want to travel, but there's still a lack of confidence there about whether and when it will be safe to do so. Part of this, I think, has been that the situation that we've been in has been a constantly evolving one and a challenging one. We always, with extended timescales. So we've kind of always thought that we were in the middle of the crisis and we would be getting out of it very shortly, but then something else has happened and we've moved on. And I also think we've seen perhaps a very unique set of circumstances that governments have had to face here, which is, very, very strong public health issues versus the benefits of the economy and industries should bring. And perhaps one of the most disappointing aspects, which I'd like to discuss with the panel here, is that despite all of the calls for international collaboration, we've seen that governments have acted on a very national and inward-looking basis because of the public health considerations. And frankly, as an industry and perhaps collectively, generally, we failed to change that. But we know that international collaboration is the key to moving forward. So one of my questions to the panel here, one area, will be how do we try to make that happen? We've got a real. This is such a broad subject. We've got a wealth of topics that I'd like to walk the panel through today. So we've got a wealth of topics, but also extreme richness in the panel that we have here, with a lot of expertise. We've got different representatives from different parts of the industry and different organizations. So they really need no introduction, but so I'm just going to confirm the names of the panelists today, and then we'll get into the hard work and the discussions. So we have with us today Henrik Hololei, the Director General for Mobility and Transport in the European Commission. We have Eamonn Brennan, the Director General of EUROCONTROL. Luis Felipe de Oliveira, the Director General of ACI. Abdul Wahab Teffaha, the Secretary General of AACO in the Middle East. And more close to home for the Hellenic Aviation Society, we have Dr. Yiannis Paraschis, the CEO of Athens International Airport, and Professor Dr. Andreas Papatheodorou, the President of the Hellenic Aviation Society. So I'm going to start the panel by asking first Henrik Hololei and then Eamonn Brennan to give us their perspectives from Europe. We'll then open that up into a more global perspective with Luis, Felipe, and Abdul Wahab in particular, but then try to bring that back a bit closer to home for everyone in Greece by wrapping up with some comments from Yiannis and Andreas as to what they've learned from the panel and how they see that applying in your home country of Greece. So with that, that's a good enough introduction from me and long enough, I believe. I'd like to get to the panel now. The process that we'll go through here is I'll ask each of the panelists to speak for 3 to 5 minutes, no longer, please, to give us your introductory comments and remarks on air transport in the COVID-19 era. Really like to start with the man at the center of the universe in Europe with regard to this subject, which is our good friend Henrik Hololei. So Henrik, over to you for your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, dear friend, Chef. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and it's a great pleasure to join you here from EUROCONTROL together with Eamonn. So we have a small think tank here to see how to make the world a better place, and especially the aviation. I think we are in the middle of a very, very difficult moment where we are. And now I was not saying something which is particularly original, but what I actually meant is that I think there were a lot of expectations that when the new year starts, the vaccinations will start, that things somehow are going to get better. I'm afraid that the reality is something different. And I'm afraid that actually in the course of this whole pandemic and the crisis, probably the next months are going to be the most difficult ones. Because what we see also is that passenger traffic is almost come to halt in Europe. The flights which are taking place are predominantly also cargo flights, and they're doing quite well. But the travel as such has more or less stopped. Despite of what we have tried to do. What we have tried to do is with the health safety protocols to create the conditions for travel, to say that, look, travel is safe, aviation is safe. And this is not just to say, it is all backed by evidence, it's all backed by scientific facts. The reality, however, is that the member states in EU have not been interested in listening to that. On the contrary, they are making things even more complicated. Quarantines, all kinds of testing regimes, which basically has made it virtually impossible to travel. And of course, this is something what we are faced today, and it is very difficult to come up with something which would go against the current trend where the health issues obviously are prioritized, but they are prioritized in a way which is the wrong way, meaning that very many countries see that the problem comes from outside. Yeah, we are fine inside, but actually it's how we go outside. It's the bad foreigners who are wanting to come to our country and spread the virus. This is not the case. I think that this has also been proved by when we issued in the beginning of December the second health safety protocol together with the ECDC, basically saying that we don't see that if you move from an epidemiologically similar area to another epidemiologically similar area, that it can actually increase the risk. But it doesn't help. Nothing what has been said is actually being followed. And the reality is that these restrictions are going to stay in place for the next months to come. It will be difficult months for the aviation. What would the key things be to concentrate on? From the European perspective, the key thing is also to maintain the single European aviation area, which has brought a lot of success. And that means competition. That means also equal treatment, transparency. And that also means the new element of resilience. And in all that, it's also inevitable that the aviation industry gets supported by governments, because this is unprecedented crisis of a century of civil aviation. No other crisis has been comparable. And it's also natural that the support is there. But at the same time, while giving this support, I think it is absolutely essential also to note that there are companies as well, and there are elements in the aviation value network who actually do not benefit from this support because they are, in European perspective, they are real European airlines. And no country owns them, but at the same time, they are the ones who provide the connectivity. And how to square that circle, how to maintain the competitiveness, the kind of level playing field inside Europe also for the future is a key thing when we are coming out from this. Last but not least, since the time is limited, confidence, trust and confidence of the passengers. Everything needs to be done in the next months in order to grow the trust and confidence of the passengers, because they are the ones who are the lifeline for this industry. They are the ones who have to hop on the plane, start traveling again when the moment arises. And yes, I know we also talk about all the vaccine certificates and all that would help travel. Great, but also let's be realistic. It is not going to happen very soon. So it is very important also to make sure that the traveling public feels going back in the airplane, hopping on a plane, feeling safe as they always do, feeling also that their health is cared for, what is the case, and enjoying the travel again. And then this industry will come back. This industry will come back. It is a very resilient industry as a whole. It has always been able to come back from all the crises, and even from the deepest crisis, I'm sure it emerges stronger. Thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrik. One immediate question for you, if I may, and this may be politically incorrect. You and I both mentioned almost the lack of willingness of states to collaborate with each other. You're sitting in the heart of the European Commission here. Do you see any prospect of that changing? Do you see any appetite for, even within Europe, states to cooperate more closely on recovery from COVID-19?
I think that there is, in general, obviously, there is a lot of cooperation taking place. And I think that we have also learned from the mistakes that were particularly made in the beginning of the crisis. So everybody understands that there has to be cooperation, but it hasn't meant that it would also be the similar ways of making traveling possible. And there, every country is very much looking inward and thinking that how they could prevent others coming in and spreading the virus. And I think that there are many elements in relation to that. It is not conceivable to see that we would have opening up the travel in the foreseeable future. Two things: we need to get the numbers under control, and this can only be achieved when the speed of vaccination will significantly increase. I sincerely hope that in the next months, this would be the case. When people get the vaccine, they get the confidence. When people get the confidence, I'm sure that the countries will also be more open to consider traveling again as a possibility and try to see how the measures will be more proportionate to the threat.
Great, thank you. Let's move on then to Eamonn Brennan, and Eamonn, ask you for your views as you sit in a fairly unique position of being able to analyse all of the air traffic data. You're also seeing your future expectations and so on. So look forward to your views on how you see things at the moment and the likely timescales and conditions for recovery.
Good evening, Jeff and Mr. President. Yiannis and everybody there. It's great to see everybody. So maybe I just focus on, build on what Henrik says. We don't foresee any major recovery in the European system till at least the summer months. So we're looking at basically our big project in Europe at the moment, I think, is called Rescue the Summer. And if we have to rescue the summer, and particularly in the tourism countries such as Greece and Spain and Portugal, then something has to happen. Now, Henrik, I think, outlined to you, Jeff and the team, the difficulties with the states, and the Commission have a very difficult, if not an impossible job, trying to pull everybody together and get a common grounds. Because the lesson I've learned from this whole thing is that we're dealing with a virus, but we're dealing with also the politicization of the virus. I mean, if it was just a public health crisis, then every country would do everything the same. But no, they don't. Just here in Belgium, and tomorrow is my big day, I'm going for a haircut. Okay, so the haircut is at 10 o'clock. They inform you they can cut your hair, but they cannot shave your beard. Okay, and this is a unique Belgian thing. And we have, all of these various things in different countries. I heard of a country today who are going to lock people up in quarantine hotels and use the army to guard them. Okay, so this is the craziness and what I would call the basic kind of nuts the way we've all come. So to get specific, Jeff. The big worry that I've got here is first of all, two things. First of all, Henrik made a very good point, and I just want to build on it for a moment, is I worry that the European markets, in terms of the level playing field, might get lost. Henrik made the point of, the Air France's and the Lufthansa, they get a lot of cash. The EasyJets, the Wizz's, the Ryanair, they don't. So what constitutes a national flag carrier? And why, if you've got the tail flag of a country on your tail, do you get bailed out? Whereas if you have something like, a harp or something different, you don't get bailed out. So this is a very basic question. So lesson number one for me is I fear we've gone backwards in the single European market, and that's really important for me to build on. The second thing I want to mention, and this affects Salvatore's area very strong for us in Europe, is the long-haul travel. A lot of European travel depends on hub and spoke travel. So the low cost, one thing, but the hub and spoke. At the moment, we can see no possibility of long-haul travel resuming. Australia informed us this week that they don't foresee long-haul travel resuming to Europe until November. So this is a big problem for us. And it comes back to this issue of the vaccine. You know, if you get a vaccine, how can you be sure that it's trusted? How can we be sure that everybody trusts the certificate, a trusted app and all of this kind of thing? And it's really important because Henrik made an important point. The vaccine is only part of the solution. But there's no point for me, and I can tell you personally, I don't see any need personally to get a vaccine if I then find that I can't travel, that I find that I have to have quarantine, that I find that I'm restricted to PCR tests. What's the point? And to me, I think we're not making this. So to come to kind of a few political points, I think as an industry, and Salvatore, you're going to kill me for saying this, I think we've lost the battle with the health authorities. We should surrender. This idea of trying to work and say, you know, aviation is safe, airports are safe, you know, they know this, but they're choosing to ignore it. So what I think we should do is move on to the next stage, which is providing technological and trusted traveller solutions so that when eventually the sun does shine again, that my vaccination certificate from Brussels will be accepted in Mexico, that your one from Canada will be accepted in Greece. And I feel we should focus on this problem straight away, because if not, that's the immediate problem. So if we spend a lot of time discussing theoretical concepts, the summer will come, the summer will go, and we lose a lot of businesses. So just to wrap up, Jeff, the other issue I just want to mention from Europe, and I'm sure Henrik would agree with this, is I'm worried that we're losing connectivity in Europe. You know, if you know the United States, there's 4 or 5 large airlines, but in Europe, there's a lot of little islands like the Greek islands, the Spanish islands, in Ireland and in Scotland, where people have small connections, little airports. And these little airports are getting no cash from the community, they're getting no help from the governments, so we're going to lose a lot of our connectivity. So the effect of the COVID crisis for me is that long haul is going to be a big problem. You know, I think that the short haul will recover in Europe, but it'll be towards the second half of the year, and we'll be lucky to get to 40% of 2019 travels. And the challenge I think that everybody in this room has is how can we provide evidence that we can travel safely? A NAP or a cert, something that will have a PCR on it, something that will have a vaccination certificate. Because if we fail to do this, then we will have shot ourselves in the foot. And that's my strong recommendation to the President of the Council. I very rarely have a chance to give him a punch, so it's good to do that. So I think it's important we focus on this, and I know that ICAO will, but we need this to happen pretty quick. So Jeff, that's it from Brussels in the company of DG Move. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Under adult supervision, but I have to say, Eamonn, I still can't get the image of you with a shaven head and a long beard out of my head at the moment. Eamonn, just one question for you. You mentioned about the sort of the potential loss of connectivity here. How do you see the industry being able to react with capacity, as and when you're both saying that it's going to be a pardon the pun, a long haul for the industry to get back to previous traffic levels? Do you believe the basic capacity will be still there? Do you believe the industry will be able to respond to the demand when it does rise?
So Jeff, I want to turn that question around, and I want to aim it more at the airports. The worry I've got about connectivity in Europe is not the actual airlines. I think they can scrape by. The worry I've got is the small regional airports in the places of Spain, Scotland, Norway that are not supported. I think the hubs will be okay, they will survive. Governments will have to make them survive. But if you take a little airstrip in the west of Ireland, where you have one air traffic controller and 3 other people employed who are the firemen, they also clean the terminal, and they may even run the restaurant and perhaps even the taxi service. These type of little aerodromes, which have 1 or 2 services a day, are going to be very severely impacted, and I worry that they won't recover. And I think it's a big challenge for ACI, because I feel ACI are focusing very much on the hubs and the big airports, but I think there's a whole small layer under there, and if we lose this, we lose everything we have in Europe. It's nice to be able to go to these little places.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. That's the perfect segue to our next panelist, Luis Felipe de Oliveira, the Director General of ACI, who will be able to give us indeed the airport's perspective, and I think has already learned the lessons of the challenges of speaking after Eamonn Brennan. So Luis Felipe, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. President. Good to be here virtually, surrounded by friends and the leaders of this industry. Just to mention to Kostas, especially our friends from Aviation Learning Society, that myself and Salvatore sent some snow from Montreal, that you can feel that we are at least in the same location with some snow around. And unfortunately, we are not together today. Basically, as Jeff mentioned, it's difficult to talk after Henrik and Eamonn because they set the scene very well, you know, and basically some of the topics they addressed is exactly what I was planning to address, especially regarding the confidence of the passengers, the decisions from unilateral decisions from the governments, and also the way that we as aviation industry, we lost the power under our own business, that is aviation, to the health authorities. At certain point, we need to recover that to be able to restore our industry. In terms of the industry, I remember last year around this time, I was visiting Mr. Salvatore in the ICAO office. When I was coming for the first time as an elected Director General from ACI, and we talk a little bit about the English, talk a little bit about the future, and basically we planned that time to have meetings during the year, and we never expected that this happen. And since I arrived in Montreal, I didn't have opportunity to see Mr. Salvatore or any of our ICAO friends since I arrived. However, we had the very good discussions on the CART. That's why, in my personal view, the CART was a very good way to improve the relationship among the industry and the relationship from the industry with the governments and among the governments as well. That's why we saw a lot of developments on the card number 1. We saw the card number 2. You saw the card number 3 that we expect to have the results in a few weeks, and that for sure will help us to restart the industry as soon as we can. As ACI, what we are doing is trying to harmonize the process as much as we can. Independent of the size of the airports around the globe, we took the CART as our Bible, and we used the CART to implement the airport health accreditation that we are doing around the globe. From our 2,000 members, we already reached 533 members, and that represents around 70% of the traffic around the globe. And that shows a kind of harmonization that comes from the ICAO, comes from the CART, and how we can prove to the passengers that you have the same approach all over the world towards health and hygiene measures. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to visit the Montreal airport to see the test facilities at Montreal airport. That's why I was sad to see an airport like Montreal with the 6 flights only, few people around, 2 laboratories, one for the departures and one for arrivals, even them not full with a lot of space to test. And according with the airport, only 0.3% of the passengers that are leaving the country represent a kind of a positive test, and the less than 1.5% from the passengers that are arriving in the country had a positive test as well. That's why the way that we need to work with vaccines and tests together during the future year will be a key for the recovery of the industry. We need to work together. We need to show this data for the governments to open and help to open the borders. And answer the question from Eamonn. Yes, we are seeing a lot of support for the industry around the world in terms of the airlines. We are happy with that, because supporting the airlines, at the end, we are supporting the airports. because we keep the airlines flying, but the airports need at certain point a kind of support, especially the small and medium ones, because if you don't have the support, not only in Europe, I'm talking about the different parts of the globe, we won't be able to continue this connectivity that is the key, the essence of aviation, that is connect people and bring social and economic development for the communities we serve. I think I already passed my 5 minutes, Jeff. That's why I pass him back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Felipe. Certainly, in my role in the World Travel and Tourism Council, we represent more than 200 of the largest travel and tourism organizations in the world: hotels, airlines, travel tour operators. But the reality in our industry is that 80% of the industry is actually small and medium-sized enterprises. So we've had to embrace that and extend our advocacy and extend our argumentation for support for travel and tourism. How have you managed to do that? I see ACI in a very similar position as representing mainly the larger airports around the world. How have you done that within the airport sector to address Eamonn's point that it's the smaller and regional airports that are potentially at most risk here?
Well, we have two ways that we are supporting these small airports in different parts of the world. The first one is we just renewed the ACI fund. The ACI fund is a fund that we have in ACI to support the training and development for the less privileged countries or airports in the world. That's why we continue to support these airports with the training, because we believe that safety is key element for our airports. That's why we need to keep them in the positive way that they are thinking towards the maintaining the standard levels of the operation. That is one of our key rules and one of our main pillars. This fund was completely renewed, and I have a pleasure to have Yiannis here, CEO of Athens Airport. This is the president of the fund, and basically what we are doing together with the airport community and exploring a little bit more than airport community, bringing more power to this fund to finance and support these small airports around the globe. For example, the airport health accreditation in certain airports in the world, in certain regions of the world, is completely financed by the ACI fund. That's why that is one of way that we as an association, we support and bring the continuity of the business for these small airports. The other one is the advocacy side. We are preparing a lot of papers and documents to help these airports to survive during the crisis, helping them in terms of the operational side, in terms of how to deal with the cargo with the vaccines, etc., that will help them to continue this process. There is a lot of other things that is going on as well in terms of the charges, the power, the slots, and the others that we are always supporting our members, because independent of the size, they are key elements of this connectivity that is very important for all of us, for all the aviation community.
Great, thank you. I'm going to exploit my privileges as moderator here by asking you a further question, just to help me move over to our next speaker, Abdul Wahab from the Arab Air Carriers Organization and sort of Middle East perspective there. By asking you, Felipe, you sit in ACI World. Are you seeing any significant differences between how airports are coping in different regions? Or is it a fairly uniform picture?
Jeff, the airport industry is different, depends on the part of the world. We have the private airports, we have the airports that are government owned, and each of them, they have their challenges. And even ACI is different on that way, because we are a confederated organization, different than the other organizations in the world that we have. ACI Europe that is independent, ACI Asia that is independent, ACI Africa that is independent, and we have a coordination, but basically each region have an approach because of the different kind of membership of the region. Africa, for example, is much more linked with the basically airports owned by the governments. Europe, there is a lot of private investors. Latin America, a lot of private investors. US, a lot of private investors. Canada is another model as well. That's why we see difference like in US and Canada. For example, in US, the government is supporting the airports in a very good way with the grants. And in Canada, the airports are receiving nothing. Basically, small airports in the north of the country are struggling to survive, you know, and that is happening here in Canada and happen as well in different other parts of the world. That's why basically depends on the ownership of the airport. We are seeing different approaches. The muscles of the investors that are owners of the airport also play a different role as well, but basically is a quite different world. The domestic markets, we see some developments. That's why we saw basically the markets like China, like Brazil, Japan, India, they are growing, and some of them are reaching the same levels of 2019. And basically because of the domestic markets, they have one regulator, they have one authority that manage the health authority as well, and that makes the big difference. That makes the difference in terms of how these airports are recovering. However, international traffic, as you all know, is going for the lowest level in the history. We have around minus 93, 94% globally on the international traffic, and that of course depends of the region, depends of the hub or not position of the airport is very affected by that.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. I'll now then turn to Abdul Wahab, who can give us a view from the air carrier's perspective, from the Middle East region, but I know he has a very excellent global view as well. So Abdul Wahab, I invite you to give us your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Jeff. Actually, what Eamonn and Henrik have said is something that in the back of my mind, you know, when you asked me about the ideas that I would share in this panel, I told you exactly what Eamonn and Henrik said. What puzzles me really is the EU is composed of governments. The EC represents those governments. ICAO is composed of governments. WHO is composed of governments. They all agreed on CARD. They all agreed on harmony. But these same governments, they go individually and do their own bit. And the reason why Montreal Airport is almost empty is because of the quarantine that the Canadian government has imposed on all travelers. So this paradox, I don't understand. I'm not willing yet to surrender, like Eamonn said. We have to surrender because, unfortunately, policies are driven by fear of blame by politicians who see the positivity rate and they get scared, they panic, and the first thing they look at, traveling, no traveling, quarantine, and so on. So this is one point which, for me, is unintelligible. And I always struggle with this paradox between governments being in international organizations deciding on something, yet these same governments individually decide on something else. The second point I would like to raise is something that Salvatore raised about climate change. What ICAO has done in the climate change is excellent, but I really have a worry with the way things are today. It's not about the zero net emissions or half of 2005, like the ICAO resolution of 2006 stipulates. It's really about the 4 pillars that were adopted in that resolution of 2016. It talks about technology improvement that is supposed to contribute 50+% of the mitigation of emissions by 2050. It talks about sustainable alternative fuels, which are supposed to deliver in excess of 25% by 2050. And it talks about the offsetting, which was supposed to deliver around 15%. and then infrastructure improvement supposed to deliver something like 5 to 6%. If I want to take, what is happening in all of these fields, the only thing that is being talked about today is how SAF can become more ubiquitous and the offsetting that should continue. So this is shifting the whole burden of the environmental issue from all across the industry onto the shoulders of the airlines. This is something that is bad. This is something that does not go along with the 2016 resolution. And if the whole world now is focused on, in the aviation industry, well, the airlines can offset. And I'm not talking, of course, about during the pandemic. One day, soon, hopefully, we will get out of this crisis and we will go back to growing again. I'm worried about that 2022 ICAO assembly is coming, and all the discussion that I hear today from everywhere in the industry is SAF and offsets. Nothing about technology, although there are plans by Airbus about hydrogen propulsion, plans by Boeing to have 100% SAF operated aircraft, but these are plans which have very, very little meat on the bones yet. So these are my worries, and they are more questions than answering anything. One more issue that I would like to raise in the panel, which is also of a global nature, because the airlines in the Arab world, Middle East and North Africa, they suffer the same malaise of the whole industry. The third issue is the technology. Technology has proven to be an excellent alternative for face-to-face meetings. It provided the possibility for the population of the world to continue to have retail purchasing, for the trade to continue to be strong. Now, what we lack in technology is, why don't we transpose this experience into the whole travel processes? Now you go to the airport. I mean, in the good old days, you go to the airport, your boarding pass is recognized on your phone. You board the airplane, based on what your phone has. You go check in on a kiosk, no people involved. Yet you go to the immigration and you need to queue and have your passport given back with a stamp and then security. I don't understand that. I don't understand how technology is actually so much leaps and bounds, has improved in the last 30 years. Yet governments are unable as yet to see that technology can actually make travel much more easier. So to sum up, what I see the challenges of the near future are thinking about climate change holistically, and not only from one angle, how we can put the burden on the airlines. Secondly, on the issue of the harmony in regulations or in guidelines, health guidelines and biosafety, what Eamonn and Henrik have said is more than enough. Governments need to follow that, especially when you talk about the health certificate, which are recognized globally. Again, I'm sorry I took a little bit of a long time, but I have one more point which I would like to challenge ICAO in that point. They are promoting health corridors, and I believe that health corridors and travel bubbles are good. But on which basis? What are the criteria to have a health corridor open or closed? Which countries can access that health corridors? If the criteria is global and recognized by everybody, that's fine. Then no discrimination. But we all know that opening health corridors sometimes gets a political angle. And I'm afraid, without stating very clearly that health corridors and travel bubbles need to follow globally accepted rules, not to have haphazard and politically motivated innuendos and ulterior motives, so that you recognize this country that it's okay to have a health bubble, a travel bubble with a health corridor, and the other country cannot access, although it has a better situation in terms of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back later in the panel and ask for different views on the three key points you've raised there about the environmental aspects, the technology aspects, and in particular travel corridors. But before we do that, I'd like to move on now to our final two panelists. First of all, Dr. Yiannis Paraschis from Athens International Airport, who indeed, given the airport ACI airport accreditation scheme, may want to talk about the environmental thing a little bit, but also Yiannis, I think, give us your view from the airport community and from Greece, please. Do we have Yiannis?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you. Talking actually out of the office, where most of the time, or in the past at least, these events have taken place by the Hellenic Aviation Society, so it's not far for me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to share with you some views. I think out of the speakers the previous speakers and good friends that have spoken so far, I'm probably the first who is not who is a simple manager of a business in the industry. I'm not a representative of an association, of a trade association, or governmental organization. So I'm obliged to have a pretty pragmatic view on things, and probably less of a policy view on things. And I say that because a year ago, when this whole thing started, I was very puzzled, and I was very active in lobbying and writing and publishing about the ideas of the need for international coordination and standards and the likes. And after some time, I realized that we had failed to convince politicians, or at the end of the day, the bottom line was not there. And I think there is some good reasons for that, or good or bad reasons, but it is understandable in the sense that travel, since the Black Death in the 14th century, is the means of making an endemic or a local disease a pandemic. And this remains the reality over the centuries that have passed since. And the means of controlling a pandemic, despite the progress in technology, still remain pretty archaic, in the sense that it's the quarantine, it's the distancing, and the likes. And as long as healthcare systems remain national and there is no burden sharing between, even in let's say, supranational constructions like the European Union, there is no burden sharing when it comes to the healthcare system. So the Greek Minister of Health and the German Minister of Health, they have to take care about their own, have to calculate their intensive care beds, and they have to make sure that their sort of citizens and respectively politicians alike are treated with priority. So what happens to visitors and others is of second priority. And even in countries where tourism is so critical, like Greece. And I think it's fair to say that, yes, indeed, after when the whole thing started and everybody started working, developing their own ideas about how to deal with the pandemic, also the kind of the pandemic diplomacy started to develop about corridors, about countries that you would like to treat preferentially or not, and the likes. We have tried to convince the Greek minister, prime minister, who came up with a very early idea of introducing pre-departure PCR tests in Europe in order to establish a confidence for the traveling public, and also as a means of controlling, let's say, the cross-border transmission. We, and as a country and as an industry, failed to do so. I mean, and despite and there was obviously during last summer an attempt to strike a balance between the economy and health, between life and livelihood in Europe at least, and where, you know, travel was open beyond essential needs. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. We were with the second wave, you know, hard awakening came, and when we had the positive news of the vaccines in late autumn, the third wave came in, and next hard awakening. So I think for the time being, we need to realize that we have lost the politicians on the way to strike a balance between health, life and livelihood. And the command and control remains and will remain for quite some time with the healthcare professionals, and that will be the priority. I think we need to realize that as an industry, and we also need to realize, despite the fact that we now all seem to realize it's the first quarter of 2021 which is lost, it's the second quarter probably which is also is going to be hardly hit, and we all are in denial mode to scrap the third and the fourth quarters, and we put all our hopes in the vaccines and the treatments and the reduction and the health and the herd immunity. I'm afraid that we need to plan for the medium and long term, because COVID will be here beyond and will impact travel beyond the peak of the crisis as we see today. That's beyond, because internationally, I think it's 85% of countries of the United Nations for the time being do not have an access to vaccines. It's because even in the richer countries, big parts of the population will not be vaccinated, either because they don't want to, or because they have children and the likes, and because we have the mutations and all of that. So I think even beyond the summer and well into 22 and 23, we will need to live with additional measures, and we will need to prepare for that, which means we'll see lower figures for quite some time. We need always to put pressure for more international coordination, but also we need to put pressure for support for the industry. I think we need to be realistic, being it airlines, being it airports, being it the employment. We will require support from governments for quite some time if we want to preserve employment. And also, we will probably require support, despite the fact, as airports now talking, we will not be able to, we will not require to invest in expanding capacity, but we will need to invest in sustainability, in digital transformation, and in safety in a wider sense, including health safety. So it is, for the time being, as it was said earlier, that it's going to get uglier before it gets better. But, and I want to close with that, I think I read recently that only 11% of the global population in 2018 entered an aircraft, and I think only 4% traveled internationally. So we are still a growth industry.
Great, thank you very much for that, and for sharing your view on the sort of planning for the medium to long term. If you could ask the Greek government for one thing that would really get Athens International Airport up and running again, what would it be?
Well, I think it is not a bit not to get up and running again, because we never had a choice to close down, and we were always operational. Compared to airlines who have also the option to discontinue services, we don't have that liberty. Of course, we have suffered significant damages. We are a privatized airport. We have bought the right to operate this place as a company based on certain assumptions. So obviously there is damages along the way, and we are holding currently discussions as to how we cover that. But that being said, I think it is very important that we get also the support to do things which are essential and good for the industry and good for us. To give you an example, we have committed back in 2019 to be the first European airport based on a program which we call Route 2025 to operate out of self-produced and self-consumed energy from solar power. Currently, we are not able to invest into that project of about 70 million out of our operating income. So there, out of European means, out of national means, is a project where we need to share the risk going forward, because I think this is essential for us, for tourism, and for the industry in the long run.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And now I'd like to move on to Andreas, and I think having Andreas as our last panelist is great because he's on the academic side of life. He has a very knowledgeable view of our industry, but also a bit more of a stand back view. So I'd like to ask Andreas to give us his views. But Andreas, we've kind of heard, to use a boxing analogy here, we've heard the suggestion that maybe we're throwing in the towel because of all of the medical issues and the health authorities. Do you see that the industry can do a Muhammad Ali here by having a little bit of a quick shuffle and then a knockout punch that can get us back into the championship position that we need to be in?
Thank you, Jeff. That's a very interesting but also difficult question. I think we shouldn't surrender, but at the same time, there are several points of concern to raise. And just to start my points here, and given that I'm the last of the panelists, I thought that I had to somehow entertain you. So I was looking at the statistics and I came up with the magic number 75. So what about 75? That's corresponds to different things. Prior to the pandemic, about 75% of international tourists arrived by air in Greece. That's much higher to the world average, which was about 50%. Obviously much lower compared to cases like Malta or Cyprus, that was up to almost 100%, but still 75% is quite high. And interestingly, 75% was also the drop that we experienced at an international level in terms of international tourist arrivals. They dropped by 74% in 2020. And if we look at traffic in Greece, more or less it dropped by 70% as well. Now, that 75% is also important because we need to consider other things. If you subtract 75 out of 100, you get 25, and 25% is roughly the percentage of tourism on the Greek GDP. It's between 25 and 30%. It's quite important. And again, 25% was approximately the occupancy rate of Greek hotels between July and September, which is quite appalling. We're talking about what should have been a high season, but as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, that was 23%. And if we look at revenue per available room, again, that was about 20 euros. The government did quite well, I think, both from an operational but also from a communication point of view to deal with the first round of the pandemic. And we managed to somehow promote the image of Greece as being a safe destination. We sort of managed to somehow save the summer season, but again, as I told you, numbers were quite low. And then we moved into the second wave, which obviously made things much worse. Now, if you take 75 and you multiply it by 25, you get 187.5, which is roughly the government's debt as a percentage of GDP back in 2019. And for 2020, that's expected to exceed 200. It's expected to be about 205%, which is really, really high. It's second to Japan, but bear in mind that Greece is a much smaller economy in any case, and we have a big issue about debt sustainability, which so far is guaranteed because real interest rates are pretty low, but and nominal interest rates are negative as well. But we don't know for how long this will be the case. That's again a point of concern. Greece experienced a 10% recession in 2020, largely because it very much depends on tourism, and with all this collapse in tourism and transport, we have lots of problems. So coming back to your question, I don't think there is any room for surrender here, at least with respect to Greece. The government is quite active in terms of introducing health corridors, in terms of promoting vaccination program, in terms of instigating new health protocols, and possibly a vaccine passports or vaccine documents. I think we need to somehow win this battle, because otherwise our country will be in deep trouble. But obviously that's not going to be easy. There are lots of things that need to be done, and obviously it's not a matter of unilateral decisions, it's a multilateral game, and unfortunately we've seen a very fragmented response so far.
Excellent, thank you. I always used to think the answer to every question was 42, but I stand corrected this evening. It's obviously 75 now. But thank you for that. This is now we've got about half an hour to go. This is the point of the discussion where I ask for help from my panelists, because I'd like to now to get us into we've heard from each of them. I'd like to get us into a discussion. I'd like them to be asking questions of each other and commenting on what each other say. Perhaps we'd start by saying we've heard a lot about the impact on the industry and various issues here. And I think it's fairly well received sort of wisdom that as the industry goes back, we won't be returning to the previous normal, and that we'll be in some form of new normal. I'd like to ask the panelists what they see, how different that new normal might be. What will be different in your view in say 2-3 years time? Will we see more regulation, less regulation? What happens with issues like airport slots, competition, airport charges, all the things that we would normally talk about in the air transport sector in normal times? How do you see, which of those do you see changing most? And I'm going to be particularly unfair at this point and ask Henrik to comment, really, because Henrik, you're kind of the regulator in the room, and with Eamonn as well, a previous regulator. Perhaps we can start with how do you see the regulatory regime and the control of the aviation industry changing? You know, have we done enough to be let off the leash, or do you see even more regulation as a requirement?
Well. It is a very good question. Yes, I think we all agree that this is a new normal. What is going to be the new normal? That is more difficult to define. I think that we can do a certain parallel with September 11. Okay, that was more focusing on the security, but just to say that certain things were introduced after that, which were unheard of before, and which have stayed with us until then, starting from the liquids and many other procedures. And in the beginning it was new. After a few years, people got used to, and now it's just part of your aviation experience, and nobody really complains too much. I think the health aspects will have a different kind of focus than in the past. I think they have come to stay, at least for a foreseeable future. I think that when we talk about safety, which always is number one for aviation, and where we really excel, being by far the most safest transport mode in the world, then the health safety component will be new. I think there will be, for some time, also some kind of contact tracing through the digital passenger locator forms, things like that. I'm sure that they will also probably have to include some information about vaccination at some point. I think that the whole aviation value chain is going to put much more attention towards the health safety aspects. I think the airports would like to say, look, people, don't worry, we have the highest safety norms in place, we adhere to them. I think there will be also, at least in the beginning, some guidance also for the passengers to adhere to that. Probably will, certainly sometime the masks will be there. I'm sure that at some point, even when the masks are not obligatory, then there will still be people who are going to wear the masks, I mean, things like that. And then could be some other elements. So I think the health safety aspects are definitely something which will be part of the new normal in the beginning and maybe also for a longer time. Another thing is also, and I'm very grateful also that my good friend Abdul Wahab was elaborating a lot on that, which was also about the aspects of sustainability. The new normal for aviation is also much more attention to sustainability. There are many people who enjoy the current situation. Well, they don't come necessarily from the aviation industry, but you know, there is no noise to some people, there are no emissions, there are no particle matter around, there are no contrails, you know. Well, the world is a better place. It's not a better place because we can't go around the world. We can't see friends, we can't see eye to eye. We are human beings. Human beings need to see eye to eye. They need to be present with other human beings, not with the screens. But that's not the point. My point is that the new normal for aviation is also being far more conscious about the environmental impact, doing much more about the environmental impact, and having a very clear path to become carbon neutral and definitely far more sustainable. The license to grow will be very much embedded in the sustainability, and I think we all know that. And again, this concerns every bit of the aviation value chain. Airports, air navigation, service providers, airlines, everybody must have a different kind of way to this, because that's the societal expectation, and that's something which is going across the world, and these expectations are there. When it comes to the regulation, I don't think that more regulation is good. I don't think that it is needed. I do believe that we have a regulatory framework which is quite solid enough and allows competition, allows global competition. But I think that it is also time to seriously look into the aspects that are building up the framework that we have for aviation. I mean, I think that we really need to ask ourselves whether the Chicago Convention of 1944 is fit for purpose, whether all the rules that are there for the ownership and control are actually restricting free competition and creation of real global carriers. I think now it's also the moment post-pandemic very much to look into these matters. I don't expect much progress in the short term, but I believe that these issues should be also addressed as part of the new normal, because the world around us is changing, and I think it is also time for certain elements that have been kind of present forever in this sector to change in order to allow more competition, which is so much needed. The new normal is also, at least in the beginning, that there will be less carriers, but I really hope that there will be soon sufficient connectivity, and that is essential regionally and also globally. Slots, airport charges, yeah, I mean, I think the slots discussions, the airport charges discussions, there it will be always there, and it's good to have it. But also, we need to ask ourselves whether what we have today is really the best we can have. I mean, whenever anybody wants to touch the slots, it's kind of, oh, no, don't do it. It's not right. Are we really fully utilizing the capacity? That's what we haven't talked about, capacity. It was the biggest problem before the crisis. Lack of available capacity, airport capacity, capacity in the air. Now, everything seems to be fine. No, all this is coming back. We need to address that as well. We need to get more efficiency out of the system. That should be also part of the new normal. And there are many other discussions which will be ongoing. And the question is, can we really continue as we have continued until now? I think this is something we need to focus today, tomorrow, the next months to come also, in panels like that. and to try to define what will be the real content of this new norm.
Great, thank you. I'd like to really turn that then to Abdul Wahab from the airline's point of view, and then to Felipe and Yiannis to comment from the airport side, if I may. Abdul Wahab.
Well, I totally agree with what Henrik said about the importance of sustainability and looking at certain normal measures, slots and so on, from a different perspective. Let me talk a little bit first about sustainability. What I would like to hear from regulators is apportionment of responsibility. Now, as I said, everything is focused on what the airlines need to do, and somewhat what the suppliers or the airlines again need to blend their aviation fuel with sustainable fuel. I haven't heard any measures that are compulsory on engine manufacturers or aircraft manufacturers or fuel suppliers, telling them that this is the amount of research and development that is needed so that to make the sustainable alternative fuel commercially available to the airline. And one more thing, the infrastructure. I agree with Henrik, but what about the new measures that are being enacted or laws that are being looked at by various countries in Europe and elsewhere, saying no improvement of infrastructure, part of our vision for a greener or to fight climate change. So no infrastructure. And what kind of normal is it going to be? Not now, not in 3 years' time, when we go out completely from the pandemic, similar to what we've done with previous pandemics, yellow fever, cholera, and so on. Ultimately, the world went out, and we will go out from that situation, I believe, in a speedier way because of two things: technology and the evolution of science, to the extent that scientists were able to find vaccines within 8 months of the start of the pandemic, while it took decades before that. So, and I'm sorry, I'm targeting Henrik with my questions, but I really need to know from the regulator's standpoint, how would you apportion the responsibility for mitigating emissions, not amongst the airlines, manufacturers, fuel suppliers, research and development, and sustainable alternative fuel, and on the other hand, on the infrastructure which we were all suffering from? What is the take on some initiatives by governments to say no more expansion of infrastructure, no more new runways, no more, like we've heard from the French government recently? What is your take on that? Through you, Jeff, to Henrik, please.
Yeah, if we can, I'll pass it to Henrik in just a second. But Henrik, if we can keep this short. But I would like to say that from the travel and tourism industry, sustainability is a big issue. And if you had any of the big CEOs here today, they'd be saying that actually it's the one thing that's going to change in travel and tourism in a big way, because sustainability has to be part of the business model going forward. And actually, it's a huge opportunity because everything has been zeroed and hotel chains have been closed and major facilities have been closed. It's actually easier to build sustainability back into the business processes as you grow back than it would have been to try and sort of stick them on top of what was existing previously. So I guess I'd quickly go to Henrik to respond to Abdul Wahab. But again, what are the opportunities and the challenges that are going to be different now, Henrik, than pre-COVID-19?
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and also thank you very much, Abdul Wahab, for all the comments. I think that you, as always, you put the finger in the right place, and of course how to deliver the sustainability remains as a key challenge in that sense. Jeff, you're absolutely right also to say that perhaps it's easier to do it now when coming out of the crisis than it would have been during the crisis, where actually, or during the crisis, before the crisis, where actually the focus was very much elsewhere. What is very important is to maintain the right balance between the different actors. By making aviation more sustainable, it cannot be only something that can be taken by one or two elements in the aviation value network. That means, for example, it cannot be put all on airlines, it cannot be put all on airports, it cannot be put all on the air navigation service providers, it cannot be put all also on the manufacturers. But they all play a very important role. One of the things that we have also learned is that there is no magic wand, there is no silver bullet. The success is in the harmonized development of the basket of measures, which includes very many different elements. I think today, two of them come as very important aspects. One is the sustainable aviation fuels. That is also where the Commission is going to put a lot of focus, and it's very likely that within one and a half months, we will have a proposal on that on the table. This is going to deliver, according to all the studies, the probably biggest share of making aviation to almost carbon neutral in next 30-40 years. And where we are coming from, the basis is very low. It's 0.05%. We need to get to blends which are 5–10%, even more. But we need to industrialize all this. And it's not only about that, it's also about the delivery of the fuels. It's also about working together with the fuel manufacturers, with working together with the fuel producers, with the airports, with the airlines. But this is what everybody in the sector says, this is the right way forward. The second is innovation. There is no doubt. And they are the manufacturers, engine manufacturers, aircraft manufacturers, they do the heavy lifting. I just had a very, very interesting discussion also with the Vice President for Technology of Airbus, who made the presentation. They are serious about delivering a liquid hydrogen-based plane by 2035 for commercial use. It's actually happening quite fast. 15 years to get a new aircraft is something that is I think, quite a short time span. We certified and everything. But this is also going to be a game changer. And I think that combination of technology, combination of sustainable aviation fuels, and of course all the different measures, the Corsia implementation, the ETS in certain constituencies, and also let's not forget, very important at least in Europe, more efficient flying. We can get up to 11% according to Eamonn's latest studies by delivering on a better functioning sky, more efficient flying, less fuel burn, which is low-hanging fruit in a way, but something which for the moment gets massive resistance of, I would say, very conservatively minded air navigation service providers. And this has to change. And we also need to start moving from lip service to say, oh, we want to have a more sustainable aviation, to the real delivery, to say, no, we are not finding obstacles why not to do it, but we are finding ways how to do it. So, all in all, it is a combination of all the players understanding one thing. The license for this sector to grow is sustainable aviation.
Great, thank you, Henrik. And you've kind of stolen my next question. I'll come back to Felipe and Yiannis in a minute on the airport side, but I just wanted to go over to you, Eamonn, because, you know, exactly what Henrik was saying, is this the opportunity to get to a single European sky, do all of the things that we've been talking about for years on stronger network management, route straightening, you know, etc. Is this the opportunity, or will it pass us by again?
No, Jeff, it very much is the opportunity. I mean, if it doesn't happen now, then when does it happen? I mean, just to give you an example, last year we had a 60-70% reduction in traffic, and we had a 60-70% reduction in CO2. Normally the situation is CO2 grows at twice the rate of traffic, and that's brought about by the inefficient network. You know, I've quoted in many presentations, you know, somebody flying from Madrid to Paris because of the inefficient route structure takes on an extra 191 kilometers. You know, and straight away there's CO2 burn, all of this kind of thing. So really, it's a very simple sum. But as Henrik said, it comes back to the situation. You know, Europe is full of nation states. All kinds of obstacles are put in our way in terms of sovereignty and all kinds of what I would call false problems. But really, the problem is, and I'm going to pass this one to Henrik, and it's not fair, it comes down to a very simple problem. It's the regulation of monopolies. And air traffic management, as you know, Jeff, and the former DG of CANSO, these guys are monopolies. Turkeys do not vote for Christmas, okay? And there is no, for instance, where I'm a former CEO of an ASP, I know the story very, very well. So unless you have reason to change, you won't. Because I'll maybe just finish with one final thing. The first day I got a job in an ASP, it took me nearly a month to understand that the more money you spend, the more money you earn. Because every business I worked for beforehand was you keep your costs low and you make profit. Here, no. The more you spend in the CapEx program, the more you can build up the regulated asset base, the more you can charge. So we've got to break this cycle, and it's a really hard nut. And it's important, though, from a European point of view, where you've got a single European currency, a single, you know, market. Pharmaceuticals move between countries without duty. And yet, as Henrik has said in speeches many times, you can drive from Sweden to the Athens and nobody will stop you. But try that in an aircraft, and you most certainly cannot do that today, because all along the way we have different zones and different radio contacts and navigation aids. So this is a big nut to crack, but it's an opportunity. So the single European sky will deliver 11% more efficient reduction in CO2. And this is my final point. This is the best way we have of achieving it, because we've tried pushing on cost. I think the more we push on environment, the more we will be able to erode the support that the monopolistic providers have. So, Jeff, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that, as you spent the last 10 years trying to stop us achieving this.
That is one thing that I will let pass by. Thank you. And let's go over to back over to the airport side now. Felipe and Yiannis, if you can do a double act here, in the sense of, you know, you've heard there's an opportunity on air traffic management. What do you see with the new norm for airports? What do you see as the if you like, the opportunities or the challenges for airports in this new world that we're facing?
I will start, Jeff. I think I will follow the words that Henrik said regarding our license to fly in the future will be more environmentally friendly. The new generation is looking for that, and basically we see the pressure in different parts of the world for greener solutions in terms of the flight. We see movements to stop the flight or reduce the flights, etc. That is very strong in Europe, that will grow, of course, around the world. Coming from the fuel industry that I spend the biggest part of my working life, what I really believe that is the place that will help us to go out or to go into a more environmentally friendly industry. We as an airport, we represent around 5% of the emissions today. And even that we have plans in Europe early, but globally to have a net zero emissions by the airports in 2050. However, we alone, we cannot do anything. That's why we need the air traffic controllers, we need the airlines, we need the fuel suppliers, we need the manufacturers. And basically, seeing the fuel, the biggest part, I think the only way that we can make this happen is if we have a strong support for the supply and demand. Basically, we need to create that the biofuels or the environmentally friendly fuels need to be subsidized during a certain period of time to create the supply and demand. All the markets in the world are based in supply and demand. If you have the cost low for a certain period of time, will create the engine to produce more biofuels as the lowest cost that will, of course, feed our aircrafts and, of course, feed with a low carbon energy our whole industry. That's why I truly believe that to make the difference, we need to work in a certain program that will support the development of suppliers of aviation fuels all over the world. What we are seeing today, another day I saw that a cargo from Europe went to San Diego in California, across the world with the biofuels that we are serving with the biofuels because of a regulatory framework that oblige the airport or the airlines there that need to use the biofuels in a certain percentage. But how is the cost? How is the environmental cost to move this cargo from place A to B, rather than have a local refinery, rather than have someone that produce the biofuel there with the different sources that we have different sources nowadays? That's why we have the technology, the products are allowed. However, we need to find a way that we can create a supply and demand, lower the costs, and of course, make this happen. That's why I will leave the airport side to Yiannis, because he has a little bit more experience than me in the airport side. That's why I won't comment too much in the airport today.
Thank you, Luis Felipe, and thank you, Jeff. I would like to take one step back and maybe get a bit philosophical here. I think the airports, aviation, whatever, I think we all go with the flow, and I think the flow is we are facing, things. I think Bill Gates said it. There are bigger things than the pandemic, and there are three major global trends in my view. The one is the climate change challenge and all the energy issues that relate to that, and all the responses that science is able and prepared to give. The whole digital science and the transformation we're going through, and bioscience. And I think the question of what COVID is all about, I think the question is how big a disruption in the form of an acceleration in these mega trends COVID will bring, and who will be the winners and who will be the losers of that. For the time being, it looks like we are on the losing side, in the sense that the climate change is to a certain extent in conflict with aviation. Digital, in what we're doing today, takes part of away from aviation when it comes to business traffic. And business science will be bioscience will be required for us to go forward when it comes to healthcare. So the question, will we need more or less regulation in the future? I think that it will depend on how big this disruption will be. I think if you compare it with the Second World War, you couldn't say that regulation before the war was fit with things that were supposed to happen after the war. And we are seeing that today, holy cows, and with my friend Henrik here, when it comes to the issue of state aid. I mean, 170 billion have been injected in the form of loans and others, mainly, or grants and contributions into aviation last year. We know that big parts of that will have to be swapped debt for equity in the future, because probably some of that will not be repaid. So things that were in the past unthinkable in the context of globalization, competition, liberalization of the markets, are now will require new answers. The same questions around the externalities of environmental costs. We have been able to escape for years and for decades as an industry. It's a difficult issue, but the question is, will we be able to get away without more regulation into that? And I think the issue, of course, what we're facing today and we are discussing, do we need more regulation? I would say, although, you know, in liberal markets, this is a bad word to say, but on the other hand, we see that we require some form of global regulation which is able to enforce things when we want to get away and solve global challenges. We see that with the pandemic. It's a global issue, and the global system has failed to reply to that because everybody falls within its own borders and does you know, whatever he thinks fits best. So I wouldn't be so dogmatic to say, you know what, the pre-pandemic regulation is fit for what will follow. It will definitely depend on many things, and obviously on the depth and width of the disruption that we're going through.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's very good way to get towards the end of this webinar. So thank you for those thoughts. I'm going to ask Andreas a question in a few seconds, but I just want to put all of the panelists on notice that after Andreas has spoken, I want to come back to you for your final thought, quite literally one sentence on what is your thought for the day in this context of, you know, the industry in the post-COVID era. So give you a few seconds to prepare for that, and I will end. I'll go around the panel and end up back with you, Yiannis, and then Andreas, because I'd like you to be able to comment about what does all this mean for Greece. But this is the Hellenic Aviation Society webinar after all. So what do you think this means for Greece? Andreas, my question for you is, again, reflecting the view that you have a sort of a broad overview of the industry from where you sit, and in so many conferences and now webinars and Zoom meetings, you know, we always talk about the need for international collaboration between governments, and we talk about collaboration between different parts of the industry, and yet we don't seem to be able to achieve that. A number of us have said on this webinar that the international collaboration is actually not happening. It's national, and some of the industry stuff. Are we getting a bit more siloed in the industry sense? I wonder if you could give us a view from your, if you like, from your stand back view of the industry, of how you see the opportunities for international collaboration and industry collaboration going forward.
Thank you, Jeff. I think there is a real risk here for aggression and bitterness to prevail, because we're talking about debt-ridden airlines, airports, other suppliers as well. So what we don't need here is cutthroat competition or cost reduction strategies that will result in a lose-lose situation. Now we need to somehow reinvent the business model and make sure that we are focused on synergies. So in the past, perhaps airline airport synergies could be related to airport runway infrastructure. Now that might be related to new health and safety protocols that can bring all the different supplies together. Again, at the level of destination, it's quite important not to go down into travel protectionism. About 10 years ago, we saw a new term being coined, staycation, which was about taking your vacation, stay at home, which might be good for the environment, but that would obviously kill aviation and international tourism. So we need to somehow make air transport take off. We need to somehow ensure sustainable tourist development. At the same time, we need to realize how important destination management is. And we've been talking for so many years about business models of airlines, of airports, of hoteliers. Now we need proper business models for the entire business ecosystem and for destinations as well. That's quite important from my point of view. Explore synergies and make sure that we address things in a systemic way. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now for the final thoughts of everybody, let's turn for literally a one sentence thought from you, please, and let's go to Henrik and Eamonn first, please.
One sentence thought: every crisis is an opportunity. Let's seize it.
Eamonn?
What we need to do is coordination. What's going to rescue us is visiting friends and relatives all over the world. Aviation is not dead.
Excellent, thank you. Abdul Wahab?
One sentence, okay. It's unfortunate that the pandemic came at the apex of populism in the world. And I believe we are a globe, and a global event needs global response. Globalization and transnational cooperation, pan-national cooperation will prevail. That I am sure of.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. Felipe?
Well, aviation and the tourist sector is a global business. Together, we represent around 10% of the GDP globally, and we are stronger together. So it's not an issue for aviation, it's not an issue for airports, it's not an issue for airlines, it's not an issue for the regulators, it's an issue for all of us, and you need to work together on that.
Excellent, thank you. Yiannis?
I'm not sure this is a sentence, but I would say agility, endurance, and fighting spirit.
Excellent, thank you. Andreas?
It will take some time for transport and tourism to fully recover, but hopefully this will be done on a more sustainable basis in the future.
Great, thank you. And finally, to both Yiannis and Andreas, any specific lessons there you think for Greece, or do you see Greece as just being another part of the aviation community globally?
Well, I would say that Greece is a pretty vulnerable player in the whole game, in the sense that it's in the European periphery. It heavily depends on connectivity. It heavily depends on tourism. So the ability to manage this crisis is, for the time being, a very big challenge. But I think the country has gained some international recognition of that, against stereotypes, that it is able to mobilize ingenuity and actually, I would say, methods and ideas that are pioneering in such an environment. And I think we're on a good track to get out of this in a way that will give us, let's say, a competitive advantage, if I may say so. It is sad to say that, you know, the health safety will be a big issue. I think it is an advantage that probably richer countries will have, and richer tourism destination will have. And I think it is important for the country to invest in that, because it will lift also its profile in the international competition.
Great, thank you. Andreas, any thoughts from you?
Well, Greek tourism has evolved into becoming the most important industry and sector for Greece, but it's important for tourism not to become a victim of its own success. And from certain cases of over-tourism, we went down to zero tourism. And now the opportunity cost is really low, because traffic and tourism are not there. I think it's the ideal timing to restructure and rethink about the new tourism model. And I think that what we call DDMMOs, Destination Development Management and Marketing Organizations, can play a key role here in terms of coordinating local stakeholders with airlines and aviation-related stakeholders as well.
Excellent, thank you. We are out of time now. I said at the beginning that the topic was probably a predictable one in a time of great unpredictability. But I'd like to thank all of the panelists for giving their very interesting and very different perspectives. I think we've covered a lot of ground this evening, and I hope we've entertained the audience for us. So I'd like to give my panelists a virtual round of applause for that, for their contributions, and to hand back to Andreas, please.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you so much for doing this great moderation of our very distinguished speakers. So on behalf of the Hellenic Aviation Society, I would like, first of all, to warmly welcome our panelists, Henrik Hololei, Felipe de Oliveira, Abdul, Wahab, Teffaha, Eamonn, Brennan, and Yiannis Paraschis for the great contributions. I would like to thank Salvatore Sciacchitano for accepting our Yiannis Award and for his wonderful keynote address. And of course, I would like to personally thank my good friend, Dr. Kostas Iatrou, for helping us organize this excellent event today. On top of that, I would like to mention that this event was under the auspices of Hermes Transport Organization. As Kostas mentioned earlier, all speakers today are members of Hermes, and our media partner was ATN, Transport News. I would also like to thank the members of the Executive Board of the Hellenic Aviation Society, Panagiotis Sotiriadis, who is our Vice President, Ioannis Savlas, our Secretary General, Haridimos Agiris, who is our Treasurer, Dimitris Kebadzis, who is a board member, Despina Tsuka, board member, and Antonis Kalophonos, who is also a board member. Many thanks to them for their efforts, and many thanks to everybody who watched us tonight, depending on your time zone. As we said, the event was a live broadcast on the Society's YouTube channel. It's been recorded as well, and it will be also available later on for people who like to watch it again or watch it for the first time at the earliest convenience. So once again, thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in another event of our Society. Thank you, and good night from Athens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for this nice event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eamonn, Henrik, Salvatore.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yiannis, thank you.